I've been living in Japan for a few years. I have been exposed to Japanese, and naturally I've been trying to learn as much of it as I can, which to date amounts to about 1%. The most fascinating aspect of Japanese is kanji, those thousands of complex characters that have several meanings and pronunciations. Kanji is very difficult to learn, but at its heart, it should actually be simple. That's because kanji characters are supposed to be pictures that easily represent their meaning. For example, look at the kanji for tree. It looks like a tree. Look at 1, 2, and 3. Straightforward. Look at mountain and river. Kind of visible. But the thing is, the list of kanji that are actually pictographic or iconic is very short, since there are thousands of kanji, and many of them have very complex and abstract meanings. They couldn't all be iconic. Although, if you trace the history of many kanji and open your mind to some incredibly far-fetched reasonings, you will manage to see in many of the kanji visual representations where there first appeared to be arbitrariness. Anyhow, this channel is about English, a language with an alphabet that is phonetic. That means our letters and words don't look like anything. Or do they? By coincidence, I'm certain, there are a few words that do look like their meaning. Cutting down the list to words that won't strain the imagination has given me a very small collection. After we look at these, we'll take a road that leads to madness. Number 1. Bed. This one might be the best on the list, but that doesn't mean that the rest are all flukes. It takes no imagination at all to see the bedposts and the comfy mattress sandwiched in between. Capitalizing the B would give us a much less comfortable sleeping arrangement that would either strain our neck or hoist our feet too high. Number 2. Eye. This is a very clear image of a pair of eyes between a nose. Of course, if you capitalize any of the E's, then it will appear as if you have just lost a bar fight. Number 3. Look. The L and K are a little shaky, but I can still see a pair of eyes looking. Whether the outer letters are a face or some kind of looking glass is up for discussion. Number 4. Boob. It might be cheating, but we have here a word that has to be in all caps. There are many pairs of boobs here. Each B is a pair, and the pair of O's is also a pair. Number 5. Shark. This is the last one that I can see without any struggle at all. Can you tell which letter is the head and which is the tail? Number 6. Poodle. If you can't see this one, you're not so crazy. But with a little effort, the poodle's long, fluffy body, high tail, and little face will appear. Number 7. Llama. This one is just as tough as poodle, but again, if you look closely, you will see the llama there. 10 is much more of a list number than 7, but reaching 10 is simply beyond me. This is the toughest list I've ever had to compile. Remember that road to madness I promised you earlier? It's time to take that trip. Let's forget about whole words and look at individual letters. What is each letter shaped like? Now let's get to these letters, all 26 of them. Without reaching too deep into obscurity, let us look at the physical images and metaphorical applications of each letter. By the way, you may consider this video either a prequel or a sequel of the critical analysis of the alphabet song I did earlier. If you haven't already, check that video out after this one. Let's look at common A, the regular handwritten form, not the fancy font type. Its physical form and metaphorical symbolism both perfectly align. A is the alphabet's equivalent to the numeric 1. It represents something that is the best, something that is first. In grades, A is the highest. In lists, A is the foremost. It also represents singularity. A or A means one. This is natural because there can only be one best. Now let's look at the physical forms of the letter. If you look closely, you'll see that common A is nothing but 1. Because the 0 before the 1 has no value, it latches onto it. How else could it survive being unwritten? The capital A maintains the meaning of being first, best, singular, a pinnacle, a peak for which to aspire. The line that upholds the pinnacle provides a sense of stability and balance, as it holds together the two caving lines. This middle line also gives us a sense of perspective. It divides the top half from the bottom half, those nearing the top from those who can't even see it from where they are. The line is a symbol of demarcation, but it gets better. Since the line remains fixed halfway between the base and the pinnacle, regardless of how big the A is written, it tells us that we are always halfway there, regardless of how much ground we have covered, how much knowledge or wealth we have acquired. There's always that much more waiting to be discovered or accumulated. It means that as we climb, the pinnacle ascends, the bar moves at the same rate at which we do, making it impossible to reach any maximum potential. We and not our goal are the line's bearing, its point of reference, so the top can never be reached. While A means best or number 1, by now it is clear that this comparison is with no one but yourself. You are A if today's version of you is the best version of you, cliché as it sounds. But even so, you are still just halfway there, because tomorrow's version of you will have to surpass today's. While it may seem daunting that we will never be more than halfway there, the light is that our potential is therefore limitless. As soon as we reach what we thought was the top of the mountain, we discover that we are at the bottom of a bigger mountain. Life is not a mountain, but a mountain range, one that stretches towards infinity. Reaching the top isn't the true success. True success is in the muscles we build while climbing, the tears and sweat we shed, the water we drink to stay hydrated, the partners we climb with, those we travel with for a few meters, and those we travel with for miles, and even to the end. The success is in the climb. Now you see what can be seen in the shape of a letter. It's not what you see, but how deeply you see it. For the other letters, I will offer brief explanations. Your imagination and critical thinking should be able to expound and expand on whatever you get. B. B is commonly used to mean second class or secondary. It is a letter grade that is not as good as A, but still not as bad as C. Anyhow, we will continue on the image of breasts that the word boob gave us earlier. Not that breasts are in any way second class. Zooming out from breasts, we can take B to mean maternity. The breasts are clearly outlined in the capital form. And of course, breastfeeding, or in general nursing a baby, is an important aspect of maternity. The common B is very clearly an expecting woman. The bulge that protrudes from the line is the belly of a very pregnant woman who must soon worry about breastfeeding. C. It would be unexciting to keep referring to letter grades, so let's ignore that road from now on. Whether capital or common, the C retains its shape as an incomplete circle. It also visibly reminds us of the crescent moon, which itself is a symbol of incompletion and inferiority when compared to the full moon, and more so when compared to the sun. This letter represents the gaps in our lives, the unanswered questions, unsolved mysteries, the roads not taken, the man who dies not having lived. D. While the C is an incomplete circle, the D is a complete semicircle, a circle cut in half. Put two Ds together back to back and you will get the full circle, diameter included. Because this circle is cut in half, the D does well to represent equality and fairness, justice and lawfulness. Equality is the breeding ground for togetherness and peace. And what can bring people together like music? The common D requires no imagination at all to be seen as a musical note or even a flipped flat, and as a symbol for the power of music. The common E could have been a perfect circle, but before it manages to reach perfection, it impatiently curls in on itself, creating that weird semicircular eye. Just the same, the capital E might have been a perfect square, but its own selfishness forces it to keep that final stroke in its center instead of completing the border. Now it looks like the edge of a devil's fork. E represents what could have been. It is opportunities we missed because of our tunnel vision, our impatience, our pride. The common F is a man with his arms held out before him and his head bowed. The capital F, having done this all its life, has its head firmly fixed in that position, causing a deformity that is the manifestation of human servitude. The capital G resembles a seashell. It is a would-be circle that suddenly changed its mind into being a spiral instead. If you were to write G into completion, it would continue to spiral inwardly, sometimes with smooth curves and other times with angular jags. The common G, as written by hand, is easily a small circle that, as soon as it meets itself, decides to spiral outwardly instead of inwardly. If this G should persist, it would span infinitely outward, just as the capital G would infinitesimalize, forming a black hole with its enormous density. While the inward spiraling could represent an excess of any internal activity, for example, overthinking, the outward spiraling could represent an excess in any external activity, such as over-talking. The common H shows us a chair. Its image is very clear. As chairs are for sitting, they can easily represent relaxation, or in a negative sense, stagnation or laziness. The capital H, however, gives us a rung on a ladder. If you pile many H's on top of each other, then you would get a higher ladder. But for now, a single step is all we have. This transition from the chair to the first step represents any step one. It is the first step that begins the journey of 1,000 miles. It is the movement from doing nothing to doing something, no matter how small that something is. Upward and tall, we see a proud person standing. The small I is a child and the capital I is an adult. Grammatically, I is a first-person singular pronoun, and metaphysically, it refers to the ego. This ego refers to the self, but with a heightened sense of self-importance. All about the self, the capital I is a singular stroke. Humans are inherently selfish, and this form speaks to that nature. In form, it is also the numeric 1, further emphasizing selfness. The smaller I, still a child, is a tad less selfish, not yet developed into a fully selfish being. The small dot above its head represents the kindness of a child. While both forms of J might resemble the respective forms of I, they're really nothing alike. Both forms of J are pictographic of the handle of an umbrella. This letter is one of shelter and support, one of selflessness. The smaller J depicts a raindrop above the umbrella, which signifies shelter from the rain. The capital J is clearly sheltering from the sun. The infinite stretch of blue skies can be seen in the horizontal line atop the stylized capital J. This protection is more than literal. While the I is the side of humans that is all about the self, the J is that small part of us that retains the childlike love and kindness. It is what allows us to build real relationships and show traits like sympathy and empathy. Both Ks are similar in shape, and looking at the individual components, we see a straight line, the same one that represents a person. The line is also a 1. On its right is a lesser than sign. First, we encounter the selfishness of humans, and then the kindness that is within us. Now we have the insecurity, the feeling of inadequacy, which is only exacerbated by this social media world. This person in the K thinks that it is less than everything else. We have gone from the extreme of self-importance to that of shamefacedness and complete lack of confidence. We continue with the image of the man. This time he may observe his shadow, which we see in the capital L's lower line. He can only observe this shadow when he is mature, as the small l remains indistinguishable from the capital I. In effect, capital L is a supercapitalized I. This observation of the shadow upon reaching maturity is our ability to reflect, to self-evaluate. This is an ability that not many humans end up ever developing. And for those who do develop this critical skill, it is only after reaching a point of maturity. The shadow could also be the darkness in us. We all have darkness and light within. And the first step we must take in facing and controlling our inner darkness is to see it through the process of reflection. M is the mountain range of life. A was one mountain. This is a broader viewpoint, showing us at least a piece of the range. Two mountains and a deep valley are clear here. The ups and downs that we always talk about can be seen right here. While the common M has gentler bumps and less dramatic hills and valleys, it only prepares us for the towering highs and abysmal lows of the bigger M, just as the trials of childhood are to prepare us for those of adulthood. N by itself usually means no, as opposed to Y, which means yes. The capital N is similar to the no sign, as in no smoking. Instead of a circle, two lines hold up the middle slash of negation. Furthermore, capital N is a pictograph of a link in a fence. It might also be a closed gate. In any case, it's a no. The common N, not yet evolved, is a mere speed bump in the road that can't yet stop anything, but merely slows something down. This letter serves to represent everything that we cannot have or cannot do, every place that we cannot reach. It is the sign of human limitation. N tells us what we can do, but O tells us that everything is possible. The perfect circle, whether small or great, common or capital, is the truest symbol of continuity and infinity. If the C represents the crescent moon, then the O is the blazing sun, pouring out its infinite power. Just as the circle has no beginning or end, the O represents all that is limitless, like the expanse of the universe or the power of God, and optimistically the potential inside each of us. The capitalized P is a flag hoisted high. Bullied by the wind, the squarish shape contorts, giving the flag a curvature. The flag could extend to represent how we humans divide ourselves into nations, and it could represent patriotism. No matter how great a nation is, though, there will come a time when it will fall, even as the great Babylon fell. The common P is clearly a lowered flag, a weakened nation. The big and small P's could also be the first world and third world countries, respectively, or the Western world versus the rest of the world. Q is a little tricky. Let's look at capital Q. It represents a disruption, an explosion, and a sudden release. You can still see the perfect O, but then there's the invasion of the interrupting line, causing a sudden chaos. You can imagine a water balloon being pricked by a needle. The water balloon is the O, and the needle is the small line. Similarly, the perfection that the O represents is ruined. The infinite power now crumbles to nothing. The order descends into mayhem, and the silence erupts into noise. Then it becomes common Q. At this stage, the interrupting line is now relatively longer, and the interrupted circle has shrunken, showing that the negative has overpowered the positive. The evil has overcome the good. Colonization and subjugation, but also charity and altruism can be found in the shape of these letters. Look at capital R. The big P that is the flag flying has now taken a small country under its wing, which is seen as the stroke beneath the P. Since the small country is now basically property of the bigger one, it has lost its own flag. This could be either charity or subjugation. The smaller people could either be prisoners or refugees. The common R is a typical street lamp, the kind that hangs overhead and sheds its yellow light on street benches. As the street lamps overlook the homeless at night, so does this big country oversee the smaller one. S remains the clearest of all pictographs. It looks and sounds like a snake, but the winding and bending of its form speaks not only to the creature many of us fear, but it also speaks to the deceptive and cunning nature of humans. Adam and Eve were deceived by a snake. And since then, the snake has been a symbol of trickery and slyness, even evil and sin. The curls of the S also illustrate the winding roads that lead to nowhere, the complexity that when unraveled reveals nothing at all. The welcoming, outstretched arms of Christ and even the cross he died on can be seen within both forms of T. These outstretched arms represent something even deeper than the kindness of the J. It is self-denial, self-sacrifice. It is that part of us that makes us give a stranger a kidney or take our shoes off and put them on the feet of a homeless man. Humans and other animals alike are keen on collecting things. We work so that we can accumulate wealth and stock our fridges. Squirrels gather nuts and store them for later eating. Even the richest men keep gathering money. 10 cars are not enough. Men and women seek relationships outside of their marriage, not really because they're unsatisfied, but because they cannot be satisfied. We are hoarders, and less is never more for us. Both forms of you are containers. The common you might be a coffee mug, while the capital U might be its pitcher. This letter also strongly resembles magnets, which, with their power to attract, are natural collectors of things. We are now nearing the end of the alphabet, and the new trend is that both forms of each letter appear identical. Of course, barring size. This new unity is the peace we have worked so hard for. The universal peace sign is beyond clear here. The two fingers are raised blissfully, whether making playful bunny ears for a silly picture or showing unity and peace. These letters are a sign that humans can live in harmony. We can see the same ups and downs that the M gave us, but we also see the light at the end of the tunnel, the hope to be had. Just as V is 2 fingers raised for the sign of peace, W is 3 fingers raised for the universal OK sign. Make this sign and trace your fingers, and then the image will become clear. X, small or great, is many things. Most of all, it is the freedom of choice. Is there a God that orders all our steps and forces us to do what we do, providing us with only the illusion of choice? Or do we really have the opportunity to shape our destinies? This question will be asked until the end of time. And X is that too, a question, an unknown. As we solve for X, we find ourselves at the pictographic crossroads, the 4-way intersection that bids us to choose. Whether all 4 roads lead to the same place is something we can never be certain of. Why is the pictograph of a fork in the road? 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood, but never can we travel both. With each choice we make, 2 roads again appear before us. And as we move through life, our choices constantly shape the roads that appear ahead. But never can we go back and choose differently. While X represents the question of what choice we will make, Y is the irreversible consequentiality of our choice. With the presentation of options come our pondering and wavering, our indecision, which can very well be so great that by the time we are ready to choose, all our options have already disappeared. The Z, with its aimless zigzagging, is this uncertainty of the human, this tendency of second-guessing and mind-changing. It is this curiousness that keeps our vision from tunneling and keeps us alert and adaptable. It is the unfixedness that makes us human rather than machine. And there you have it, every letter and the meaning of its shape. It was a long and winding road, but I do hope it was worth the sweat.